Welcome again to Sid Caudle. And Sid's got some newspaper headlines to answer for. Not that he's culpable, but he might be in one or two, especially the footy section. But we'll leave that to the end like we normally do. And we'll start off with the lovely Ed Miliband and his energy. Now, a lot of people are writing in about this, and basically what's happened this year, he's going to tell factories, we're going to pay your money back in the height of the sunny season, if we get one in the UK, because we've already got too many windmills. He's not said that, that's my wording. We've got too many windmills, we've got excess power, the grid cannot handle it. Proves the point, this Sid, doesn't it?
Well, you have to understand how the grid works. I mean, basically, it takes the cheapest form of energy first, and if there's enough energy there, it takes that, and then it goes on to the next form of energy. And of course, when the sun's shining, if there's too much energy coming from solar, then obviously there's too much coming in. So basically, they would have to discard all of the solar, because that option then becomes impossible for the grid to handle. But you see, this is why in the winter, when there's very little wind blowing sometimes, and there's always very little sun, then they've got to look for the next cheapest form of energy, which may be nuclear, maybe gas-fired power stations. It depends what's there. It could be energy coming from France, might be the next cheapest. I mean, that's also comes into the grid. So yeah, it's actually quite complicated how it works. But at the end of the day, they've got to have some sort of balance. If there's no balance, then if there's no energy coming from one source, then they're just in a mess and the lights go off, which has happened in a lot of African countries, unfortunately. So there has to be balance in our energy.
Well, I've got a quote for you. This gentleman says, who's high up in the power generating industry, knows it all. But also, why the hell do we keep building more solar if we're already in a position where we're getting more electricity than we already need? That is only going to make the problem worse. And he's right. I mean, you think of all these windmills that keep being built. They're not going to last. We've discussed this before, Sid. The average life is about 14, 15 years on a windmill, and they're very expensive to keep servicing.
You see, the problem is we've got political dogma taking over from business strategy. You see, and when that happens, you've always got a problem. You see, that's what happens under a communist system. Under a communist system, the state decides what it wants. So the state says, we will build a new shoe factory and we'll get a million new shoes very cheaply from this shoe factory. The problem is they then expect everyone in the whole country to be wearing the same shoes. And they don't take into account of taste or anything like that because the state can't take into account taste or market demand or anything like that. That's not communism. Communism is you produce what you believe the people need and you don't care what they want. You just produce what you believe they need. And that's what's going on with this. They believe people need solar and wind. That's what they think we need. And they think that's the best form of energy. It's political, not business strategy. So they just do what they think the people need without taking into account of what people prefer and what people want, which is what the market always does, what business always does. Because a business, if it doesn't take account of what people want, they know they can't sell the product. So all the time they're doing market research. What do people want? They're looking for new ideas, new products that will be attractive to people. You see, the state doesn't do that. But this is where this government, in adopting the communist system effectively, has just got things totally wrong.
That's a bit of a frightening statement, Sid, that we're governed by communists.
Well, I'm not saying necessarily that we've got all the oppression that goes with communism, because obviously one of the terrible aspects of the communist system is that you then have a very powerful state, which then takes away freedom from the people, especially freedom from Christians, which is what influenced my politics so much when I was a teenager, because I became aware of how the communist system worked vis-a-vis Christians. Now, I'm not saying that this government is taking away all our freedoms, even though there was a big demonstration on Saturday against digital ID, because that certainly is taking away people's freedoms. But I'm not saying that we've gone all the way with that yet. But what I'm saying is from an economic point of view, I'm just purely looking at it from an economic point of view. From an economic point of view, communism doesn't work.
As demonstrated throughout the century, in fact.
Yeah.
This Employment Rights Act, Angela is allegedly at the moment doing a deal with Andy Burnham, which is a bit bizarre, but this is her baby. And allegedly the plot is for her to succeed Keir Starmer. Now, whether this is true or false, it's very intriguing, because there she is. She's getting on with her Employment Rights Act. Back to this in a second. But Andy Burnham apparently is going to control her while he's not got a seat. And then she's going to hand her position as PM over to him when he finally gets a seat. Any mileage in this?
Well, this is some of the intrigue of politics. But if you do that sort of deal, what will then tend to happen is that when Andy Burnham comes into Parliament and Angela Rayner, who is now Prime Minister, changes her mind and doesn't hand over the Prime Ministership to Andy Burnham. That's what happened with the deal that Tony Blair made with Gordon Brown. It was agreed between them that Tony Blair would be Prime Minister first, and then he would hand over to Gordon Brown after the first term. But Tony Blair was so enjoying being Prime Minister, he decided he wasn't going to hand over to Gordon Brown until he'd been Prime Minister for about 8 or 10 years and finally handed over to Gordon Brown with about 2 years left of the Parliament. So Gordon Brown was only Prime Minister for about 2 years. So they can make that deal, but my advice to Andy Burnham would be don't rely on her, because she probably won't abide by the deal. But if I might just say, Andy Burnham, to me, is a much more pleasant character than most of the people in the Labour Party. But his policies are very much on the left, and his policies would be a complete disaster. So you have to separate the character, which I think he scores a big plus on, to the policies, which are actually more important than the character.
Sadly, history teaches us that's not the case, and we vote for the celebrity, don't we? However, we'll see how that one goes. Fresh polling from the getting back to our original Independent Business Network suggests that there is a big gap between reality and the Employers' Rights Act, back to the aforementioned Angela, and what the workers really want. And it's quite staggering, because they've done a poll, and this is up your previous street within the trade union movement, Sid, whereby the trade unions are welcomed, very much in inverted commas, welcomed into business places if you've got more than 21 employees. And they've got a right to be in there every week. And in some cases, a room has to be provided for them. Back to communism. There we go, but that's the law. The poll is fascinating. 7% of employees, that's all, want this to happen. They're not interested. They're interested in their employer and their career more than the trade unions. Interesting.
Well, that is interesting. And since we talk about the trade unions, I find what's going on at the moment with London Underground absolutely fascinating, because TfL, Transport for London, has basically said to the tube drivers, if you wish, you can work 4 days rather than 5 days, provided you do the same hours. So if you do longer hours each day, then you don't have to work for 3 days in the week. And the drivers' union, ASLEF, thinks wonderful, what a tremendous option for our drivers. Great. The RMT union, the which is the other rail workers other than the drivers, have said, no, it's dangerous. This is highly dangerous. What you're doing has to be stopped. And it's now everyone's on strike. You just think, what? It's just crazy. I've never known a more crazy strike in my whole life because they're basically striking for something that most people want. Because it's not compulsory, it's just an option. Really, it's just mad. So good trade unionism negotiates and only uses industrial action as an absolute last resort. And that what we got at the moment, almost across the board, is not good trade unionism.
No, indeed. And, we can put the doctors in this lot. It's the usual suspects. And I don't know, it's not exactly back to Margaret Thatcher's time where she had to tackle the unions head on. But I tell you what, Sid, with some of them, it's even worse.
Well, maybe, but I mean, see what was going on in Margaret Thatcher's time, or prior to her, particularly in Ted Heath's time. I mean, Ted Heath called an election on who runs Britain, because does the elected government run Britain, or do the trade unions run Britain? Because the trade unions were exercising so much power and dictating to government what they wanted, and the government wasn't able to resist them. And Margaret Thatcher came in basically and said, I'm going to curb union power. And she did it step by step, very carefully. So the first thing she did was to make it illegal to do secondary picketing. Secondary picketing was when I saw it myself in Sheffield. You had a steel strike going on in Sheffield, and all the miners would come along and picket out the steel workers. So basically, they would be there on the picket line, and the steel workers couldn't go to work because there were miners there on the picket line preventing them from going into work. That was secondary picketing. Now, that was the first thing that she made illegal. Now, it was fairly obvious to anybody with sense that secondary picketing should be illegal. But, that was then she tackled the closed shop. The closed shop was where everybody in a certain industry has to be a member of a union. Now, the problem with that is that if everybody has to be a member of a union in order to work, if the union then disciplines a member and basically says, sorry, what you've done, is contrary to union policy and we're expelling you from the union, they also lost their job because they had to be a member of a union to work there, a member of the union, the recognised union, in order to work in a particular place. Well, Margaret Thatcher then made that legal, so the union couldn't actually sack people effectively, because which again, people would say, well, yeah, that's an abuse. But then she went on and on. Then she brought in 1984, she brought in the secret ballot. So before a strike, you can't just have a strike because a shop steward says it's all out today, lads. Negotiations are broken down. We're and with a mass picket preventing people from working. She says we're not allowing that anymore. There has to be a ballot before you strike. So everybody has to have a secret ballot where they can say whether they support the strike or not. That was a major step forward, a massive step forward. And Norman Tebbit, by the way, was the employment secretary then who brought that in. But she did it. She didn't just day one say, oh, we're going to change everything. She step by step, she brought in gradual changes. But you see, Angela Rayner's position is everything that Margaret Thatcher did was wrong. Everything that Margaret Thatcher did should be reversed. That's what she said. That's what she said. So she's going to allow secondary picketing. She's going to reintroduce the closed shop. She's going to get rid of ballots before strikes. That's what she said. I mean, what she's doing now is basically her first step to reintroduce union power.
Yes, indeed. Beggars belief, if you think back on it. Nostalgia, maybe is the right word. You've mentioned various luminaries there in the political world. We've got none like that anymore, have we?
Well, the thing about Margaret Thatcher is that she thought through what she was doing. And also, she said, I don't want to be on television too much because if I'm on television all the time, people will get fed up with me. So I'm just going to get on with doing what I know is the best for the country and govern what I believe is, is producing the right policies. And some of her sayings were, there is no alternative. I mean, she was called Tina. Yeah, there is no alternative. That was one of her sayings. This is what we've got to do. And another thing she said, you may not agree with me now, but in time you'll see I'm right. That was something, there's got to be time to allow my policies to work through. Now, it's complete opposite of Tony Blair. You see, Tony Blair came in with managing the next day's news. So everything for him was a matter of perception. So he wasn't concerned about the fundamentals of what he did. He was concerned about what was going to be in the newspapers, how his government was being perceived, and so he by managing the news, he managed to remain incredibly popular. Now it's very interesting because at the time when Margaret Thatcher was governing, she was generally very unpopular. But in retrospect, people say, oh, she completely transformed the trade unions. She transformed the economy. She brought in privatization. She allowed people to buy the council houses, which was a massive social reform. And people say what she did, absolutely was wonderful. And I remember when she actually left government in 1991, they were interviewing her and they actually said to her, you've transformed the economy. Her enemies on the BBC, you've transformed the economy. That was a big plus. And she actually said to them, giving me a plus for transforming the economy is an incredible achievement. So you're actually saying that what I've done has been an incredible achievement. Now, but you see, if you look at Tony Blair, in retrospect, when you look at his time in office, people say, well, why on earth did he get us into the Iraq War? What a total disaster. And when he left in 2008, when the end of his term, we had a massive financial crash, which he could have foreseen. He could easily have foreseen this massive financial crash that was coming. I could see it because I went to the United States and I saw properties being foreclosed left, right, and centre because of the way the mortgage was just being handed out far too liberally without proper controls, the self-cert mortgages, etc. So I could see what was happening. I could see it coming, but Tony Blair couldn't. So when you look back in retrospect, you say Tony Blair's time in office didn't actually achieve anything at all, and he made a lot of categorical mistakes. You see, but at the time he was popular because he was managing the news. Who would you rather have? Somebody who is unpopular but knows what they're doing, has got clear policies, is doing the right thing for the country, or somebody who is popular but is making a complete mess of things? And by the way, what we've now got is the worst of both worlds. We've got a highly unpopular leader who's also making a complete mess of everything.
I think you're right, Sid. And the way the media works, of course, is celebrity, celebrity, celebrity. That's all people are interested in. You can't put a new type of program. We've tried this indeed. Oh, well, we want a celebrity. Don't you want somebody that knows something about the subject that this documentary is about? No, we want a celebrity. Says it all, perhaps.
Well, yes, well, obviously that's why you've got me on because I know what I'm talking about.
He says modestly over the pond. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. There's been a big report just come out, and it's calculated that DEI alone, conservatively, small c, has cost the states £94 billion last year alone. My goodness me, that is phenomenal. But how's it broken down? Well, $1,160 a year for each working family of 2 adults. That's what the cost is. Well, how's it worked out? Well, they want things to include not the best person for the job, but the best person that is of a certain racial group, identity, whatever. And it's not only cost that money, It's causing accidents, and it's got to stop. And they're going to have a big campaign to get rid of these DEI departments. They cost a fortune. And 1 second over the pond again to Britain, you've only got to look at the NHS to see what it's costing them. And that, of course, in that situation, affects real lives. Sid, we've got to get, as the Americans usually do before us, in there, full front, get this sorted out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's in our manifesto. You know, we said we save 20 billion by getting rid of all woke schemes, and there's enormous amounts of money going to Stonewall, and the money goes to Stonewall for training courses. So there's masses of government departments that are bringing in Stonewall to train their staff on how to be more diverse. You know, and it's just like the whole thing is complete nonsense. Plus, there's a whole thing about government contracts. These government contracts have an enormous section of the economy. I mean, you're looking at in the region of 500 billion for all government contracts combined. So what's going on there, for instance, is that in the NHS, there was one time when you'd have your hospital and you'd have a kitchen inside the hospital to provide food for patients. You'd have the hospital would employ cleaners to clean the hospital, and the hospital would employ engineers to service the equipment in their hospital, and so on and so forth. What they do now is everything goes out to contract. So there's a contract for the cleaning. There's a contract for cleaning all the bed linen. There's a contract for the food in the hospital. There's a contract for the engineers to service the equipment, and so on and so forth. These are all government contracts, and doing it that way is much more efficient. But the problem is that since 2012, and this was actually introduced at the say of the Liberal Democrats when they were in coalition with the Conservatives, since 2012, they put in social requirements for government contracts. And these social requirements include being climate friendly. So, you know, all of a sudden, to get a contract to provide food in a hospital, you have to be climate friendly. You know, and it's just like, what? And plus, you have to have DEI, clear DEI policies in your company. So you have to be employing a certain number of ethnic minorities and a certain number of homosexuals and so on and so forth. This is also a requirement in order to get a government contract. And the Adam Smith Institute have estimated that if they get rid of all these social requirements, and by the way, I'm not talking about things like, you know, unfair dismissal, I mean, or health and safety. I mean, things like that are very, very important. That people, you know, employees have rights not to be unfairly dismissed, and you have proper health and safety rules in a contract. That's absolutely right. I'm talking about additional social requirements. And Adam Smith Institute have estimated if you get rid of all these additional social requirements, you can actually save somewhere in the region of 1/10. So it'll be 50 billion. So, you know, it's this thing, it's gone, it's crazy. I mean, you talk about 94 billion in the States. I've just highlighted probably a total of about 70 billion in the UK. We're probably far worse than the United States in pushing in this whole DEI stuff in government. It's mad. It's utterly mad.
The report also states that there is evidence that the employer is hiring fewer people and paying them less because of this. There's so much money to go around. You can't double the price of your product because of these DEI regulations. Self-imposed in a lot of cases, but there it is. Sid, let's stay with America for a little while. This weekend has been an eye-opener. 3 attempts on a president in 2 years, just over 2 years, to kill him. It's gone out of hand. Now, there's big debates or a divided society like we have in the United Kingdom. Big debates over social media. I think it's all of these, but nothing seems to be done about it. In fact, there's a bit of criticism about the way the special services attacked the man, let him get as far as he actually got in a hotel that has got previous one has to say it's not the most secure building.
Yeah, I'm very surprised that somebody managed to actually get as close to the president as he did, frankly. But if you actually look at the film, you realise that he rushed the security. So he literally and the guy on the security desk was actually looking the other way when he suddenly appeared and absolutely ran full pelt at him. Which I guess, I mean, the guy who was on the desk, there should have been somebody there who was looking in the right direction. I mean, really, when it happened. But anyway, that's what happened. He rushed the security guest, running full pelt, and he had guns and knives on him. He was in the hall, and he actually managed to shoot one of the security people in the chest, but because of his body armor, he was okay. And they jumped on him and got him to the floor. So he didn't actually manage to fire a shot at the president, but it's undoubtedly that was his aim. And the other thing that's very clear to me is that even though they say, oh, this was a lone gunman, I mean, I'm sure that he was a lone gunman in the sense that there wasn't anybody else with him at the time. But I'm also totally convinced that somebody was paying him enormous sums of money to actually do what he did. Who it was, I don't know. It could well be Iran. It could be lots of people. There's lots of people that want Trump dead. There's no question about that. And there's lots of people that are willing to pay enormous sums of money to to see him killed. But there's nobody at all under any circumstances who would just decide, get up in the morning and decide, I'm going to take a pot shot at Donald Trump today. I mean, it just doesn't happen.
Yeah, sad, and it leaves one back to the gun laws. The Americans, I don't think will ever change, talking to many of them as we do. But everything comes into this. And the other thing, maybe DEI comes into it, Sid, because I've noticed among the riots this weekend in the UK and in that episode in Washington, there was a woman there looking a bit bewildered, appeared not to be able to fire her gun in that situation. One can mirror that in the UK with the riots, with the riot shields that are given. There's lots of women police officers. I'm sure some of them are very capable, but a lot of them have not the physical strength in a riot situation, in a crisis to cope. Physically, they can't. And again, DEI.
Yes, I mean, I presume you're talking about Butler, Pennsylvania, when Trump was actually shot in the ear and somebody else behind him was actually killed by the shot. But yes, and it was quite shocking that there was a woman there from the Secret Service who you actually see her on film fumbling for a gun, but actually never actually manages to get her gun out of its holster. And she was interviewed later and she said, I wasn't going to die for Donald Trump. So it's like, what? I mean, what was going on that day was something very insidious because there's no way that that gunman should have ever, in a month of Sundays, been allowed to get onto that roof within sniping range of and fire a shot at Donald Trump. No way. No way. Anybody with an ounce of sense could have seen that, that's got to be cleared. We've got to make 100% certain that that is safe. There's nobody on that roof. So the fact that he was able to get on there and fire a shot at Trump means that somebody in Secret Service wasn't doing their job. And when you've got women in Secret Service, I mean, I'm not just saying, anti-women. I think it's anybody, frankly, in Secret Service that is seen fumbling for their gun and can't get it, and then afterwards says, I wasn't going to sacrifice my life for Donald Trump. It could have been a man. It doesn't matter whether it's a woman or not, but that person should never, ever be employed any further in Secret Service. They should be sacked immediately. I mean, I hope she was sacked immediately. I don't know. But I think, frankly, that the people that were around Donald Trump this week did do their job and got him on the ground and stripped him off very quickly. They stripped him off, no doubt, because make sure he wasn't wearing a suicide vest or hadn't got other things, other hidden weapons on him.
Yeah, I mean, we might not have our destroyers arriving to protect our protectorate in the Mediterranean. It takes weeks, but I can't see that happening for 1 minute in Britain. I think every rooftop within firing distance would be surveyed, and you see this often in London. They're up there looking at what's going on. But yeah, so we can get some things right sometimes.
Well, I think, to be quite honest with you, I think in most situations in America, it wouldn't have happened. So I think there was something insidious going on that day. It looked as though it may well be that people in the Secret Service had been bought off. But the very fact that one of the key people who was right round Donald Trump looking after him was basically incompetent shows that something was gone wrong. Something had gone seriously wrong.
Interesting, yes. Let's go on for something else interesting. This is not an early sports news, but it contains information about a great sportsman, Imran Khan. And for those of us who were more of that era, a great cricketer, phenomenal cricketer. He's now aged 73. My goodness me. And he made the big mistake going into politics, of course. And he is languishing in a jail cell, 8 by 10. It's not him. He's always been up and go and get at it. It's been absolute purgatory in jail, and there's no time limit on his jail sentence. They don't like his politics. He's done some daft things in his time politically, but not deserving what he's got now. And there he is, a fantastic cricketer that Pakistan should be honouring, said, not being. But politics is politics, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the way Imran Khan's been treated is absolutely appalling. It's you can you, you can disagree with his politics, you can disagree with what he did as prime minister, but if you say, imagine for a moment that Jeremy Corbyn had actually won the 2017 election, which he actually did very well in. So he didn't come that far from winning that election. It was just absolutely crazy when Theresa May called the election because she had a big majority. She had no reason to call it. But Jeremy Corbyn did very well. Now, had he actually won that election and been in power, his policies, in my book, are completely unacceptable and will be disastrous for the country. But we wouldn't have put him in prison. No, but Jeremy Corbyn wouldn't have been in prison because he didn't do the policies, carry out the policies we wanted. And, frankly, for Pakistan to be putting the Prime Minister in prison because they don't approve of his policies is an absolutely terrible thing to do, frankly. Terrible.
Yeah, and he did a lot of good. He played a lot of good cricket. He founded the first large cancer hospital. So he did a lot of good. It's politics between India and Pakistan alone, and that involves cricket in many ways, is diverse, let's say. And we move on, and we're going to talk about DV, and that is deep assessment of a person before they are allowed to start work, maybe for the government, maybe as position of ambassador. And that is what our friend Peter Mandelson was subject to, apparently. But it's christened DV, but my goodness me, do they go into your background? Give you an example. You are called in over a period of several weeks, actually, to be interviewed about your finances, about your internet history. Now, put yourself in the place of Mandelson and others and think, what's your internet history? Your WhatsApp history, your relationships, and they get you in for quite a number of hours. I suppose it's part of the softening up. They're going to question you about drug taking, about infidelity, about gambling, about financial distress, association with extremism, sexual fetishes. My goodness me. Now, this was done on Mandelson, and he still was appointed ambassador. It's a shambles.
Well, what happened with Mandelson is he was a political appointment. So Keir Starmer announced his appointment before any vetting took place or any vetting started. And uh, the evidence from Ollie Robbins in the Foreign Office was that Number 10 was not interested in vetting. They just what they even said that somebody from Number 10, you're using foul language, basically said just effing approve him. And they were under enormous pressure. So the appointment was made in November 2004, I believe, and the vetting didn't start until January. And it was only later in January that he was due to take the post. He didn't actually take the post then, but the appointment was announced. Now, Ollie Robbins in the Foreign Office took the view that having announced the appointment, to then announce that it was not going to proceed would be highly embarrassing for the British government, because Donald Trump had been told that Peter Mandelson was going to be the new ambassador, and Peter Mandelson was obviously had been told, and everything was being prepared for him to take over. To then say, oh, we've changed our mind, he's not going to take over, would have been very embarrassing for the government. So he had to weigh as to whether the vetting, which they then had in the end, was so bad that basically the whole British government had to be embarrassed, and the offer of the ambassadorship to Peter Mandelson had to be withdrawn. And Ollie Robbins took the view that the problems could be managed. That's what he said. But from Keir Starmer's point of view, he wasn't interested in vetting. And what he said basically in Parliament is just completely, utterly dishonest, which several MPs have pointed out, including Lee Anderson, who's basically said, you've lied. He's obviously lied. I mean, he said, oh, no, I didn't put I didn't put those who appointed Mandelson under any pressure at all. I didn't put Ollie Robbins under any pressure. So basically the evidence that Ollie Robbins gave to the Foreign Affairs Select Committee was false, was what Keir Starmer said. But you know that he's not telling the truth, because he actually made the appointment before the vetting started. And then he said, oh, it's disgusting that they didn't tell me the result of the vetting. But he didn't want to know. He obviously didn't want to know. Because if he wanted to know, he'd have said to them, oh, right, okay, before the appointment can be made, we've got to go through all the full process. We've got to have the result of the vetting. I want to see the result of the vetting on my desk before we make the appointment. That was the recommendation that had been put to him. That was what he was told he should do. And that's what he didn't do. He just made the appointment before the vetting started.
Yeah. And many other incidents along his 2-year course as PM. I tell you what we've got to do before we go, Sid, and discuss a little bit about Starmer the traitor, because he wants us to not be on our own anymore as an outlier in Europe. He clearly wants us back into the EU, and is doing it by the back, the side door, whichever door he can open. He is adopting backdoor tactics for us to take on laws generated by the EU about food in particular at the moment. Do people realise what is going on, Sid?
I think a lot of people do realise what's going on. And I think people are utterly disgusted. Because you see, the thing is, the Labour Party manifesto said, we will not rejoin the customs union. We will not rejoin the single market. Britain has left the European Union and will make the most of it. That was what they were saying prior to the election. To then, after the election, to say, oh, we're going to follow all the rules of the single market, and we're going to follow all the rules of the customs union, and we're going to give away all our fishing rights for 12 years, which they have done. And our view is that Britain's best interest is to be closely aligned with the EU, which is what Starmer's now said. Now, to basically do something completely different from what they said before the election, in my view, is utterly dishonest. You see, the thing is, in the time of the last election, in July 2024, Starmer did not want the EU to be an issue. That's why he said, "Oh yeah, no, we can't discuss the EU. It's fine. It's the decision's been made, and we're going to run with it." That's why he said it, because he didn't want to discuss it. If he'd have said, you know, leaving the EU has been, in my view, has been a disaster for the UK. I want us more closely aligned with the EU. I want us closely aligned with all the rules of the single market, and I want the EU to have rights over all our fishing. I don't think it's in the interest of the UK to have fishing rights. I mean, if he'd have said all that during the election campaign, he would have nosedived in the opinion polls, and he'd have got thousands, if not millions, fewer votes. He knows that. So he basically cheated.
Yeah, and it's indefensible, Sid. And it's not the only thing. I repeat, I've never seen somebody get to power and then go back on practically every one of his manifesto declarations. This is the man. It's not just an odd item. It goes on and on and on. And Europe, particular, is very contentious. Now, we've lived in Europe for most of our life, so we know it well. Believe you me, average Brit, you don't know what you're into here. And we keep saying one thing, and I don't deny that I'll say it again. When I am in a conversation with anybody that is pro-Europe, I just ask them the simple question. Never have I had a straight answer. And the question is, do you believe in democracy? Oh, yes, of course we believe in democracy. Well, why do you want to go in Europe? That's the most undemocratic governance practically in the world. You can't vote people in or out. Oh, well, we've got MEPs, is the only defence that they can give. Well, MEPs are completely under the governance of the top guys that control everything. They've got no power. It's a discussion forum, nothing else. So why would you vote for a non-democratic being?
Yes, absolutely. This was the argument that Tony Benn made very powerfully way back in 1975 when we had the original referendum whether we should go into the European Union. And you can look at some of his interviews going back to then, and he's very clear. You know, I can vote out members of parliament if I don't agree with them. I can't vote out any member of the commission. It's the commission that controls Europe. And you're absolutely right that the European Parliament can only agree or disagree with the Commission. All new legislation is initiated by the Commission. That's where the power lies within Europe. And yeah, Tony Benn said very clearly, I can't vote in or out the Commission. They're making their decisions, and I have no control over them. So why join a club which I've got no control over? This is totally against democracy. So what you're saying was something that he articulated brilliantly. Unfortunately, Tony Benn represented the left of the Labour Party, and he was joined by Enoch Powell, who represented the right of the Conservative Party in being opposed to the European Union. And most people looked at it and thought, who do I want to associate with? The leaders of the Conservative Party, the Liberals at that time, and the Labour Party, who are all in favour of the European Union, or the EEC as it then was, the European Economic Community? Or do I identify with Tony Benn and Enoch Powell, who are very much on the fringes of politics? And people thought, you know, no, I've got to go with the people who are the party leaders. But when you actually look at the arguments that are being put forward, you've got to say, I'm sorry. But what Tony Benn and Enoch Powell were saying was absolutely right, and were proven absolutely right. We should have never have gone into the European Economic Community.
Well, that's the other con, if you wish, that is akin to the con at the moment with Starmer. Oh,
Mm,
it's a European community. Well, we'll all vote for that, won't we? It's good trade.
mm.
No, it never was envisaged to be a solely European community. It's always been what we have now, a controller, the great, the big controller. And unless you've lived under the regime, and we have in various European countries, you're not aware of the pressure. And you've mentioned ID cards. Wow. I'll tell you how bad they get. For instance, now in Spain, every last penny is controlled. And you've got to be careful when you draw cash out of a bank. The sensible thing to do is to go and see your friendly bank manager. If you can get in there, it's even worse than the British system, seeing your bank manager. And he will give you a tip of how much from his branch you can take out in cash before the big controller gets hold of you and says, "What's this for?" And you're investigated. Now, why are Spain in this situation? Well, we learnt a phrase very soon when we came to Spain originally, which was sale la ley, sale la trampa. And that means literally, when a new law comes out, your job, even duty as a Spaniard, is to find a way around the law. Now, call that being dodgy, cheating, and whatever, but that is the psyche of the Spanish people. So they can live with overrule, as I call it, but find a way around it. But that's not the British mentality, Sid, which is to obey the law, however stupid that law is. And whatever happens, law is number one before everything else, usually common sense. So you've got different mentalities in Europe, completely different countries. It will never be the United States of America, which of course is the goal of the EU in certain senses. So beware, the number of laws we've got to obey and adhere to are phenomenal. It's not just straight bananas, it's more insidious things. As an example, we are trying to at the moment employ somebody for one of our companies over here. And because we're not resident in Spain at the moment, we're resident in another European country, we can't. Oh, I thought Europe was all together. No, we can't employ people. It's just a technicality, but the law will not be moved. And you're faced with decisions like this, which just keep good business down the whole time because somebody there in the middle of Brussels, not knowing each and every country and the way it works, will just dictate what happens. It's cruel what will happen if Britain goes in, especially as we're law keepers.
Well, yeah, I completely agree with you. One thing I would say is that people have got to be very careful about blindly obeying the law because actually, after the Second World War, when they had the Nuremberg trials, the defense of the Nazis in the Nuremberg trials is we were obeying the law because basically the law was to kill Jews, and the law was to every Jew had to have a star on to identify themselves. That was the law. Now, you see, law is only to be obeyed if it is moral. And at the moment, you see, under this government, we've now got a law that it's illegal to pray outside an abortion centre. Now, that is not a law that we should obey. Anyone should obey, frankly. I've already fallen foul of it and been fined £100, but so what? You know, I'm under no obligation to obey that law because it's an immoral law. So we have to have a sense of moral judgment when it comes to the law and not just blindly follow it.
Interesting, Sid. You're a revolutionary after all, you see. Which moves us on to football and various things. It's a bit sad, actually, what's happening in football. Leicester City, My goodness me, 10 years ago, they were top of the league. It was, some people say, a bit of a fluke, but I don't know. They were there, they got the points. Well done, them. But they're now in the third tier. My goodness me, what's gone on?
What happened is that they overspent, which happened unfortunately to my club. Because they overspent, they were docked a whole load of points, and because they were docked a load of points, they've ended up getting relegated. You see, docking a club a lot of points is actually very demoralising to the club, especially mid-season, which has happened to Leicester and it happened to Reading as well. Suddenly, mid-season, you've got 40 points, and then suddenly you're told, "Oh, we're taking 8 points off you. You've now got 32 points," and it might not mean that the club is now in the relegation zone. In Leicester's case, it meant that they were just above the relegation zone, but it has a terrible effect on the confidence of the players and the confidence of the club, because it's like suddenly it's like, oh, what are we playing for? How many more points are we going to be docked? We've earned these points. We've played well, and now they've been taken off us. And I frankly, I understand that if a club overspends, there has to be a penalty. But I don't honestly believe they should be docking points mid-season. I think it should be at the end of the season, when they should be looking at what happened, probably maybe for the beginning of the next season. That's what happened with Sheffield Wednesday. They've had a terrible season, but at least they were docked points at the beginning of the season, so they've known for the whole season what they were going to face. And they've also been indicated that all their penalties of applying this season, they're not going to have a penalty this season and another penalty next and another penalty the season after, which is what happened with Reading. And I don't know what's going to happen with Leicester. Maybe that they'll be in League One and they'll suddenly be told, "Oh, you've lost another 10 points because you've overspent." And the reason for this, by the way, is because the way they calculate it is the total spend over, or overspend, I should say, in the total over the previous 3 seasons. So the fact that Leicester massively overspent 2 seasons ago means that is then still there for the next season. So the next season they could have a load more points deducted, which is very unfair on the players and the fans, frankly.
Absolutely right. There you go. I've got another thing that comes into this, actually. Player power. If there's an illustration of this, one has to look at a couple of clubs, especially. One is Man U, the other is Chelsea. They've got rid of their manager, and I repeat that, the players, have got rid of their manager. Player power. Too much money. They've not played a decent game for nearly half a season. Suddenly the manager goes, and there was a significant win over Leeds United at the weekend. And it was a different team, all the commentators said. And that happened at Manchester United on a couple of occasions, when players, too powerful, took the dressing room back, as it were, and the manager had to go. This is wrong, Sid.
Well, frankly, I was amazed that Chelsea appointed Rosinha. I mean, he'd done a bad job at Hull City. He'd almost got them relegated. And when they were right at the bottom of the table, they sacked him and brought in a new manager. And how on earth they thought that he was going to be a great manager for Chelsea, I've no idea. But I think, to be fair, what I was told by Man United supporters happened at Man United was that basically somebody who was looking at the team, from a dispassionate point of view, realized that a lot of players weren't playing in the right position and they needed to change the way in which they were playing. And sometimes when you're looking at the team as a spectator, not as a manager, you're looking at the team as a spectator, you can see things that aren't right if you're clever. And you can come in and put those things right from inside the club. You can have instant success. And that's what happened with Michael Carrick. And I believe that's probably what happened with Chelsea. Because they've put somebody internally in there now for the time being. And it doesn't mean that this new manager is going to be a great manager. Michael Carrick may not be a great manager. but he was good for the interim. He was a very good interim manager. And to have a good interim manager is also important. And that's where Chelsea have fallen down this season. And that's where Tottenham also have fallen down this season.
Well, Amarin you're referring to, who was playing everybody out of position, perhaps himself as well. You're quite right, but there are two previous other occasions with Man U where the player power took over. And as a matter of interest, there's talk behind the scenes of a certain player that's gone to Barcelona, namely Rashford, coming back to Manchester United. I believe firmly he and Garnacho, talking about Chelsea, were involved in one or two skirmishes behind the scenes. Anyway, football, Sid, is football. But before we leave it, we've got to say and regret the demise, perhaps, of 52 years of football focus on the BBC. But we're going to get real about this because the BBC and others came up with excuses, in my opinion. Oh, it's run its course. People are not they're interested in that part of the game. But it used to be the big programme before the Saturday afternoon bash on the football field. And of course, when other matches were played on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, then yeah, okay, there is that about it. But the real problem is, and nobody looks at the elephant in the room, is that instead of having four blokes there playing football at the top of the league and now being top pundits, they decided in their wisdom, did the BBC, to go DEI, and we've got to get two ladies and two men because we have now ladies football, which nobody watches. I exaggerate. Fewer people watch, a lot fewer people watch. And the programme, from the date they put the two ladies in, went down immediately 40%. Why don't we get the truth?
Okay, well, to be honest with you, I watch all my football on Sky, which is frankly, which is where most of the football is nowadays. I mean, even in the past, it used to be, the great occasion for British football was the FA Cup final. And and the great occasion during the week was Football Focus and Match of the Day. But that's no longer the case. I mean, now people are watching live matches and people aren't watching BBC. But before you conclude, I have to say there's one item that I want to introduce, and that is the London Marathon, because that is my sport, because I've run several London marathons myself. And what we've had this week is a world record with a Kenyan runner, Saw, who for the first time has run under 2 hours. 1 hour 59:30 he ran on Sunday. And that is an absolutely amazing achievement. And it's a wonderful credit to him and to the sport of athletics. I, by the way, when I was 55, managed to run under 3 hours in 2 hours 59, and I thought that was a wonderful achievement. So to run in under 2 hours is just phenomenal.
Well, there you are. He's a politician, Sid, and it comes out fully when we get to the football. I mean, we agree 90% on politics. We probably agree 10% on football. And instead of answering the question, he bypasses it and comes on to the run, the great run, which incidentally may be 2 days next year because there's too many people running. That's all right. That's a good problem. Sid, thank you so much. We will see you shortly.